everyone. Welcome to the BIMA Being Marketers webcast. I am Emily Sicorsi. I am the co-founder and CEO of Root River, which hosts the webcast. I'm joined by my amazing team, Justin Foster, Jen Lawhead, and Kat Weiss, and together we make up Root and River. And we are also joined today by Scott Monty, who is our very special guest, and we will introduce him properly in just a moment. But I wanted to let everyone know that the BIMA webcast is part of our community that we are launching fully in April. We started working on BIMA last year, and we're doing a full launch of an awesome community that is going to bring us all together in a new and exciting way in April. So we do hope that you join the community, and you will get information on how to do that after the webcast. So these special guest webcasts will go on. We're going to host them every other month with and talk to someone who is leading marketing, who has been in the trenches just like you, whether you're a solopreneur or you're somebody that's working in the marketing space for another brand. And we're going to pick their brain about marketing and their perspective on that, but also about who they are and how they care for themselves as they do the work of marketing. So that is what this is all about, and that's what we'll dig into today. And I just want to point out that Jen and Kat are going to be audience ambassadors. So they will transition to listening in chat and culling through your questions and comments. So please feel free to make them as the discussion with Scott begins. And if you have clarifying questions that come up as he's talking or one of us is talking, please drop those in chat, because we're going to stop about halfway through the discussion and check on chat and see what's going on there and see what questions we have. And Jen and Kat will share those with us. All right, I think we're ready. I think that's it. Did I miss anything, team?
Nope. All right. So Scott Monty, Scott and I have met. This is like a lot of modern relationships. I think we met once in person, as I recall. I believe it was 2013. And I met you through another one of our friends and a client of ours, Bryce Hoffman, the founder of Red Team Thinking. And I've always found you to be quite fascinating. And at some point I told Emily about you, and she also became a fan. And so here we are talking to you, and super excited, super honored. A little bit about Scott, and we'll kick things off. Scott is a strategic communication and leadership coach. He works with C-suites to help them embrace better communication with what he calls timeless and timely advice, which is also the name of his very awesome and popular newsletter. And he focuses on modernizing their culture according to the changing needs of customers, but does it quite differently around examples of history, literature, philosophy, and poetry. Scott was the first Fortune 10 leader of social media when he worked for the Ford Motor Company, which is where you were at when I met you, and is recognized by The Economist as #1 on the list of top 25 social business leaders. And so that's quite the CV to kick off our first conversation with a thought leader in 2021.
Welcome.
Clearly no pressure, right?
None at all. And in fact, to add to that, I just want to say that if anyone on any of our attendees are people who are doing social or marketing for another brand, we have a lot of thanks to give to Scott for sort of being one of the pioneers in that space during his time at Ford, really educating the market. This morning, Scott, I was going back and watching some interviews that you did, kind of early days. And it was interesting to see how far we've come in a relatively short amount of time around the conversation about social media and where it is today. So thank you for your work. Thank you for being at the front of the pack and slaying the dragons ahead of us.
It was my honor. And, I mean, the stuff that we did, I mean, a lot of it we did just because we had to. We were just in a place and time where the market required certain reactions from us. And there were new platforms that were coming to use every single month, seemingly. And, in automotive terminology, we paved the road behind us. And, I mean, it's scary sometimes, but at the same time, it's exhilarating because you don't know what mistakes you're making. You know, I mean, you're making them on behalf of other people, but in some ways there really aren't any mistakes because no one's done it before.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it.
What was interesting to me around the time that we met is, as we've been talking about already, is how much that was the wild frontier in the corporate world. And remembering how radically different your view was, that social media was an opportunity, not a threat. A lot of the people we talked to I was talking to, this is in my pre-knowing Emily days. So a lot of the circles I was talking to in the corporate world, they had the view that this was some sort of either an advertising platform for interrupting people, or that it was some sort of threat to the manufactured reality that they'd made with their brand, which is true. It probably is. But you had a very fresh perspective from the very beginning. And I'm curious about why that is. Like, where did that come from, that you as a thinker and a knower of history were able to look at social media from a corporate standpoint and go, ooh, this is a good thing?
Well, I think it's thanks in part to being hired by the right company. You know, I was in Boston for 20 years. And I got called up to the big leagues by Ford. And when I told my friends and associates and colleagues that I was going to go to work for Ford and I was going to move to the Midwest, they kind of scratched their heads and they go, Ford? But, you know, why wouldn't you go to work for a winner like Toyota, a leader in the space? Ford is, you know, so last century. And this was in 2008 or so. And my thought process was, look, Ford actually needs the help, for one, right? I want to be part of a comeback story. I want to be part of something that's being built. I don't want to ride coattails of something that's already there. To me, it's much more exciting to approach a challenge together with a team, with a new outlook, with a new set of tools, with experimentation and an attitude of let's try anything and let's get the support we need, than it is to just kind of, you know, I'll keep sailing along and maybe, you know, try one thing here or there. The second thing that I noticed is that the leadership at Ford Motor Company under Alan Mulally was remarkably different than your typical automotive leadership. You know, Alan got there 2 years before I did and set about putting culture change in place, culture change that required everyone to be working together, right? Ford had been notorious up until that time for its fiefdoms all around the world, departments even battling each other out for personnel, for dollars, et cetera. And Alan's idea was, look, we're all working for the same company. We're all working for the same customers. We should be pulling together in the same direction. And to me, that was emblematic of everything we had been talking about on social media, about building communities, about transparency, about advancing the industry together, whether or not one of us made a bit of success or whether we did it together. It's about advancing for everyone's good. And then the third thing that really got me is when we thought about the strategy for how we were going to approach things at Ford. Well, first of all, as I said before, we didn't have much time to think about it because we were thrust into the global carpocalypse. I got there in July of 2008. 10 days later, Ford filed for its largest quarterly loss in the company's history, $8.7 billion. And then the whole financial meltdown started globally. So, you know, we were really on the hot seat. But what I recognized was a couple things. One is that the company had a plan. There was a business strategy in place and a very easily understandable business strategy. The communication strategy was built to undergird the business strategy. And therefore, social media would be part of that communication strategy. We weren't just doing social because it was the coolest thing to do. We were doing it in service to advancing the business goals. And in doing so, in approaching that strategy, we decided, and again, part by circumstance, because we had the accounts, I had the accounts, of taking a very personal approach, of not being a logo tweeting at people and responding to people in blog comments and on YouTube and all the rest, but actually putting real people on those accounts and in those seats. And that was consistent, as I saw it, with Ford's history. Why? Because Henry Ford, the namesake of the great-grandson that was the executive chairman while I was there, Bill Ford, he was the face of Ford Motor Company for its first 40 years. And his name is still on the logo today. And if you look back, you know, when Steve Jobs died, people said, oh, Steve Jobs, he's up there with Thomas Edison, Henry Ford, right? These great industrialists who changed the face of the earth. I thought, well, you can't really escape the history of Henry Ford, and bad and good. Henry Ford was a complex guy. I'm not saying he was a bastion of all things leaders need to be, far from it. But you have to admit that what he did to change the face of the automotive industry and the world was remarkable. And he personally oversaw a lot of it. So as a result, our approach to social was very personal and had humanity at the bottom of it. And that, I think, drove us a lot further, a lot faster than just going out with corporate accounts and, you know, throwing some paid media at stuff and doing what everyone else was trying to do.
Yeah. There's so many different rabbit holes I want to go down based on your answer. I think a lot of the things that people are still struggling with now is, you talked about the fiefdoms, and we run into this a lot just in the divided thinking around brand. And we work with a lot of small businesses, solopreneurs, and they have this idea of like, are we working on my personal brand or are we working on the business brand? And we always say yes. And as humans, we'll always tend back to that divided thinking and that fiefdom thinking. So, and then this other idea of like, we have come so far so fast. You talked about being really hard pressed because of necessity to create the road in front of you, and you just had to do it. I think because of the pressures of our world today, we all as marketers and as human beings feel a sense of that, like we have to do something. And I think where a lot of branding and marketing stalls out is just not knowing what to do, and also having that dividedness, having that lack of clarity. So what can you say about what you've learned in that kind of crock pot, that like hot pot of innovation to today's world of just craziness and urgency?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is be comfortable with vulnerability. And I don't mean to go all Brene Brown on you here.
Oh, that'd be fine. That's okay.
But look, people appreciate when you're authentic with them. And vulnerability, to me, goes hand in hand with authenticity. If you're having a hard day, if you're having a hard time addressing something your community needs, well, let them know, right? I mean, they need to understand that there's a person behind the keyboard, behind the screen, who has other things going on in life, who may be struggling with. Everybody we meet online has something they're struggling with in their life. That's just the reality. You know, life doesn't come with a handbook. Whether you are dealing with aging parents, whether you are raising a small family, whether you're ending a relationship, starting a relationship, you know, all kinds of things that are not even related to the business you're running or the goal you're trying to achieve at work, right? All of these things affect us. If you let people know, you know, I'll give you an example. There was a crisis we had where it was right after Ford was hauled in front of Congress for the big automotive bailout hearings, right? Now, Ford was there ostensibly not to get bailout money, but to help support the rest of the industry. But we spent 6 months doing what I call digital hand-to-hand combat, helping people understand why we were there, what our plan was, what we were doing. Okay. In the midst of this, I got a tweet at 5:30 in the morning from someone as I was getting ready to go to work that they ran there's this person that ran a Ford fan forum, and the Ford lawyers sent a cease and desist letter, wanted him to shut down his forum, which had been in existence for 10 to 15 years, wanted him to change URLs, and was demanding $5,000 out of him. Okay, so we're getting lambasted by the public for being in Congress, and our lawyers decide it's a good time to take a sledgehammer to our fans, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I tweeted back. I said, I'm going to get to the bottom of this. Let me check it out. And over the course of an 8-hour period, you saw a whole evolution of a crisis happen, and it was contained by the end of the day. Spoiler alert. But during that, I was letting people know I'm going into a meeting with the general counsel. I'm on a call with the owner of this discussion forum. I discovered that there was counterfeit merchandise being sold on there. You know, I was letting people be part of the story, right? Because this is crisis 101, crisis communications 101. First, stop doing whatever it is you're doing that's causing the crisis if you are at the center of it. Number two, say something, right? Even if it's nothing of import, just to let people know you're aware of it, you're working on it, you've got challenges, but it's being acknowledged. You know, if I had to take that scenario from December of 2008 and plunk it down in March of 2021, I don't think the public would be, shall we say, quite as understanding or forgiving or patient even. Mm-hmm. However, the principles are the same. Whether or not the timeline is the same, the principles are the same. And it's really about letting people in and letting them know what you're up to. And to me, that is just fundamental in any kind of business, whether you're doing it online or off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so interesting, Scott. And thinking in terms of like the arc of history, we know that, you know, the mob mentality is deeply ingrained in the human psyche. So you go back, you know, thousands of years and there was always the mob. One of the things we hear a lot from marketers and our clients is this kind of fear that they're going to say something wrong or do something wrong on a social platform in particular. And then, you know, I'm rolling my eyes as I say the term cancel culture, but there's a sense of like, oh no, if I do something wrong or say something wrong, then the mob is going to come after me. Now, that has happened. I know people that made a mistake and ended up having to move and hire armed security guards because they made a social mistake, public mistake. But it's a common question we get in brands. And so I would ask you that. How does a leader of a brand, someone responsible for the voice of a brand, how do you navigate standing up for what you believe in, you know, state where you stand, and also deal with backlash?
Well, I would say, first of all, you have to be true to yourself. You know, I mean, if you're trying to play something off that just doesn't fit with your brand or with who you are, well, people are going to find out about it eventually anyway. And you can sense when people really aren't in it, you know, when their heart and soul isn't in something, and if they're just mouthing the words. As far as this idea of being afraid, look, there's nothing wrong with fear. We all have fears. Aside from your extreme example, you know, what's the worst that's going to happen by misspeaking online? And quite frankly, it's easily remedied with another thing that you don't see often enough these days, and that's an apology. Someone taking ownership over an offense they created, over something they didn't mean to say. And it goes hand in hand with accountability. You know, accountability builds trust. When people are willing to stand up there, when a leader is willing to stand up there and say, look, I take responsibility for this. Like Harry Truman, right? The buck stops here. That was the famous sign on his desk. And he meant it too. He actually made a decision to fire General MacArthur in 1948. And he said, look, I know this is going to ruffle a lot of feathers. I know this is a re-election year and it could cost me the presidency, but it's the right thing to do. I have to do this. consequences be damned, and I will take the heat for it, right? How often do you hear that today, right? Not often at all, which is what makes it so refreshing when people do hear that kind of honesty, that kind of accountability, that kind of authenticity, right? We need to learn the art of apology. We need to learn how to take responsibility. We need to get people up there and put their integrity first, rather than simply being a slave to the brand.
I think that's a really good point. And Justin and I were talking earlier this week about, like the three most common values people will often say that their business holds or they hold. And one of them is typically integrity. But I always like to go back to the definition of integrity, which is wholeness. It's not most people say, oh, it's doing what you say you will do. Sure, there's an aspect of it, but an integral is like being complete, being whole. And we come as messy human beings who do make mistakes. I always like to point to Lin-Manuel Miranda and his response when people began criticizing Hamilton after it was released on Apple Plus, just for its portrayal of the founding fathers. And he just said, well, the criticism is fair game. I spent 9 years or 7 years creating this, and it's a piece of art, and you may criticize it. I did the best I could. It's not perfect. And I thought that was like exactly what you're talking about, Scott. It was so refreshing. And it was just like, instead of, you feel yourself tensing up at the conflict, but when someone can come in and genuinely apologize and take accountability, the air sort of goes out of it. I want to ask about another trend. We're talking about sort of the current things that people are branding or marketing through. In this week's newsletter, in your Timely and Timeless newsletter this week, you're talking about the democratization of money. And so I think it's a obviously very timely conversation, very topical. And I find within myself still some resistance to even learning more about cryptocurrencies and non-fungible. I always get stuck there because I just love the word fungible so much. And I love that I turn on the radio and people are saying fungible. Like, can we put that on billboards? I love that. So my question for you is, why should marketers, why should business owners, why should people who are branding pay attention to this? What's happening in this realm that we need to pay attention to? Why is it important? And can you give us like an entry point if it does seem really still esoteric?
It does. And like you, Emily, I resisted for a long time as well. And it primarily because of the bad name Crypto Bros gave it on Twitter, if I may. These guys that seem, and it's mostly guys, I'm sorry, with the hustle culture, right? Just, day trading cryptocurrency. And like, well, can you explain it? Right. So the first thing that turned me off about it is that it's non-fungible. It's not a tangible asset. How am I supposed to understand? I know when I've got money in my pocket, right? I even understand how a credit card works, right? But when you're talking about cryptocurrency, this is a real foreign topic, right? But when you think about, and I was on Second Life as far back as 2006. When you think about something like that, a virtual world, and you're buying virtual objects there, my kids play Fortnite. I get a bill on my Apple or my credit card account for $25 for a skin package. I'm like, what is this, right? You're paying $25 for an outfit you're going to dress your guy up on. All right. Look, I get it. I had action figures as a kid, and you get the accessories, whether it was Barbies or G.I. Joe, whatever. We've all done this kind of thing. And now it's just happening online. So as far as marketers are concerned, I just launched my own coin. It's a timeless coin, and the symbol is Monty on rally.io. As a matter of fact, if there's anybody here who wants to go to rally.io and create an account, right? If you look up Monty and you tweet me your rally ID, I will give you 5 timeless coins, 5 Montys for your thoughts, just to try it out, right? Now, why is this important? For a creator, right? And this can extend to any kind of marketer. For a creator, it's something that connects me with my community. It's something for my community to say, I believe in what you're doing, right? I want to support you. I want to help build this community, this market together, right? As more coins open up, there are other creators you can find, and I'm sure they'll get to a point where they will open it up for everyone, right? But we do Venmo right now. We do PayPal. We do other things of exchanging monetary value. This is simply the same kind of behavior, right? Timeless behavior. And I address the creation of money all the way back 3,000 years ago and how it's evolved over time. And it's just a different form now than we're used to, right? So I think we need to get comfortable with it, recognize that, it may not have its time and place for everyone right now, but there are opportunities inherent for those of us who do create products, services, whether they're real or virtual, to reward our fans and for fans to support the creator.
That's helpful. That's helpful for me. Sort of when you were talking about explaining it, I thought of like badges within like a community or even just content downloads. So that is definitely helpful.
Yeah. And I may get to a point where I say, hey, everyone who has 100 timeless coins or more, I will invite you to a private virtual event, an exclusive virtual event, a video chat, right? You can do an AMA or, I'll sit down with you for 30 minutes for an in-depth coaching session. I think there's all kinds of ways to experiment with this.
That's great. That's really good. That's very helpful for me. I want to pause because we're at the halfway mark, and I just want to check in with our audience and see if we have any questions that might be coming up in chat. Jen and Pat.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask Scott a question while we're waiting to see if anybody has any other questions. And this is somewhat related to crypto and trends and whatnot, but many of our clients are thought leaders in the sense that either they're already thought leaders and they hire us to help them with their brand, or they are entrepreneurs that want to have thought leadership as one of their differentiators. One of the things that I've always admired about you, even though at frequent times we may have disagreed on a ideological level, is how you navigate as a thought leader, sharing your opinions with the world. And so it's not so much about a corporate brand, unless it's like the CEO or somebody, but someone's thought leadership brand or their personal brand. I don't like that term. What are your advice, your tips on being your true self, sharing your views, but in a way that is, how do you navigate that?
Sure. Well, look, and it's different, during my time at Ford and now. When I was at Ford, I could certainly be myself, but in terms of certain topics, I was better advised not to discuss them. The typical ones: politics, sex, and religion, the ones that are always anathema to any Thanksgiving conversation, right? Why? Because I knew that there were people that could have differing views on some of these things. And our market was not left or right, conservatives or liberals, Democrats or Republicans. It was people who drive, right? And that's everybody. So you didn't want to offend any one group or another. So for that reason, I kept my opinions to myself on those particular topics. But at the same time, what you saw was what you got. I was not somebody else who showed up at work than who I was after I left work. And the primary reason for that is because, do you know how exhausting it would be trying to keep up two personae? I mean, one in the outside world and one in the business world. Not to mention, forgetting who it is when you're doing it. I'll never forget. And this goes back to what we were talking about before. One of the all-time Twitter faux pas out there was right here in Detroit. the agency, and specifically the social media manager at the agency who was handling the Chrysler account, forgot to log off of the Chrysler account while he was driving. And on his way to work, he said, "It's amazing they call this the Motor City when no one knows how to effing drive." From the Chrysler account. Now, we were like high-fiving each other all over the halls at Ford, but that guy got fired. The agency was terminated, right? Why? Because, well, look, he was literally inhabiting a different persona, a different account than he was. Now, is it okay to have that opinion about driving? Yeah, absolutely. But then don't get anywhere near an automotive account if that's your attitude, right? Find somebody else to take on that role, right? So it's about being yourself through and through. Now, since I've left Ford, to your point, Justin, I've been a little more outspoken, particularly over the last 5 years.
Right.
And it's mostly because of integrity and what I believe in. It really doesn't have anything to do with political positions at all. It's about leadership and integrity and responsibility, accountability, honesty, all of the good traits of leadership, certainly that I learned at the feet of Alan Malawi while I was at Ford, just simply got turned on its head over the last 5 years. And I couldn't stand to see that happening. And as someone with a voice, I felt like it was my responsibility. There's a phrase called noblesse oblige. And it's very hoity-toity sounding, but what it means is, and Teddy Roosevelt basically said this, when you have a certain position of power, you have a responsibility, right? It is an obligation to the rest of society that you use your powers for good and not evil, right? It's the classic Spider-Man thing. To those who have been granted great power comes great responsibility. I mean, and it's in the Bible too. I mean, you can go all the way back to ancient times. The concept is there, right? So I felt like it was an obligation. I had a moral obligation to use my platforms to stand up for what I felt was right.
Yes. We believe that branding is a force for good, and we try to be that force for good. And I think that it's really important to use one's voice, but to do it mindfully, as you did, when you were at Ford and then afterwards. Another thing that you must be running into as a content creator and somebody who is so prolific and consistent with Timely and Timeless and with your blog, which I know you started in the early 2000s. And I, as a former journalist, and the original content creators, I have felt that that pressure. And so what I'm interested in for you, can you talk a little bit about the effort and how you manage the energy and the effort? I mean, you mentioned this at the end of your newsletter this week. It takes a lot of effort to keep up the pace of content creation, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. And for the clients that we serve, they're all talking about this. How do I do this? How do I consistently get out there and put myself out there? And to your earlier point, being vulnerable is great. I have learned that as I've avoided in the past, I avoided vulnerability because I didn't know how to deal with like the weight of it afterwards, sort of the vulnerability hangover that Brene Brown talks about. So there's that aspect. Then there's just the sheer energy and logistical aspect of putting content out into the world. So share with us, if you would, just a little bit about how you maybe wrangle those and how you combat them, and also how you let them in and recuperate and refresh yourself to continue to produce content.
So thanks for that, Emily. That's a great question. And knowing that it comes from a former journalist, simpatico there. Yes. And it's funny because when I never had a communications job until I came to Ford. I was hired by the corporate communications team. I had been in marketing, right? Marketing and sales throughout my career. But I was no stranger to writing. And I've always enjoyed writing. I was a classics major as an undergrad, so I had to do a lot of essay writing, a lot of reading as well, as you can imagine. And my side hobby includes Sherlock Holmes. You may see some Sherlock Holmes material behind me. I've been known to write a lot with that, right? So I've kind of got the writing gene, if you will. When it comes to doing a newsletter in particular, more so than a blog, although, same kind of rules can apply. It's really about consistency, right? It's about making a commitment to your audience and then living up to that commitment whatever the cadence is, every day, every week, every month, right? Because first of all, in doing so, you build a habit, not only for yourself, but for your audience. They know to expect a newsletter from you every Monday or every Friday, whenever it comes out. And you can even get it right down to the hour too, every Monday at 8 a.m., every Friday at noon, right? It's about building that kind of, the old appointment TV, the must-see TV, right? Because everything's on demand now. That makes the appointment stuff even more valuable, right? You look at what's going on with Clubhouse, right? And again, this seems to be the latest flash in the pan, but it's really, it's a lot like old time radio. I've got a biography on my shelf about Jack Benny. The biography is called Sunday Nights at 7, because that's when his show always used to be on. And my dad, when he saw that book on my shelf, he goes, yeah, I remember sitting down and watching radio. Right? They'd sit in front of the radio, just watch the radio. Sunday Nights at 7. That's when we had to be there, right? So it's refreshing in this on-demand world to have certain appointments like that. In terms of the actual commitment to the craft, I think you need to take stock as to what works for you. My newsletter, when I first started it out, it was called This Week in Digital. And then I changed it to the Full Monty and eventually evolved that to Timeless and Timely, right? So there's been this kind of this long tail to it, but it's changed form over time because I've recognized a difference in need, right? A difference in need of my audience, a difference in need of what I can do. When I was doing the Full Monty 3 years ago, I had 8 different sections that I would fill out, multiple stories for each. So I had 70 to 80 links in each newsletter that went out. And suddenly we saw a rise of daily newsletters, whether it's The Skim, The Hustle, Morning Brew, Axios. They were all doing what I was doing, even doing it in one section of my 8 sections every single day with a staff of dozens of people. There's no way I could do that and make it as relevant and fresh every single week. And quite frankly, I was burning myself out. So I recognized it was time to change the format, right? And that's where I kind of looked around. I'm like, I really like history. I've always liked it. I like literature. Why don't I figure out a way to merge what I see happening in business with what I've already seen happen in history? And it also comes from pattern recognition, right? The stuff we talked about earlier about what's going on now, it's the same kind of stuff we've seen for a decade. The behaviors are the same, right? It's just a new generation of workers has arrived, a new set of platforms has opened up, but we still respond the same kind of way. So kind of merging all of those together, I came out with Timeless and Timely, and I'm on a cadence now where I've got a topic a week, right? And I know based on what's happening in the news, what I think the topic is going to be the next week. And I've got about, I want to say 30 or 40 topics lined up that I just kind of note things that I've read, things that I've seen in the news and in industry, and I've just kind of matched them up. And when I know, that my topic is going to be cryptocurrency, for example, NFTs, well, then suddenly everything I'm coming across has that lens to it. And suddenly I'm on the lookout for more material to support what I'm going to write about. And it all kind of naturally arranges itself And then my job is simply to make sense out of all of it and put the words together.
As a writer, I can really relate to that. I do a similar thing. But I think two things I took from your answer, I think, tapping into both the needs of the audience and the fact that those are going to evolve and change, and other people might come in and do something a little bit better than you, or maybe differently, and you lose your passion for it. So it's tapping into the needs of the audience, but also tapping into your own energy and your own interests and building that in. And I think that's something a lot of people miss. And maybe they feel if they are marketing for another brand that they can't do that. And I happen to think you still can bring that in, because if you have that energy, like you have the energy for literature and history, it will inform the other modalities, the other areas of interest that you also want to explore, and it will give it kind of vibrancy. So a lot of times people, again, they feel they have to divide that. And from what your answer, I'm hearing you say, bring it together, and then things will start to flow even a little bit easier if you're open to that evolution and to bringing in what interests you most.
Yeah, and I think, Emily, to your point, the energy, it comes from who or what you surround yourself with, right? The team that you're with every day, whether you're physically with them or having Zoom calls or Slack meetings or whatever, they're the ones that bring you your energy. As a solopreneur, this is it. I mean, I don't have colleagues to sit around with. I mean, I've certainly, obviously, highly networked, and I have people I talk to online every day. But to me, you look around my office, my library here, I'm inspired by the books I read. And quite frankly, the one thing that I got over the last few years was a subscription to Lapham's Quarterly, right? This is a wonderful journal, comes out 4 times a year. And I mean, you look at the topics here: politics, magic shows, communication, family. It's filled with stories of history and literature, philosophy, and more. And I can read through this and find quotes, find examples of, happenings of this in history. And as I'm reading through this, it's like a Cliff's Notes for the great books of the Western world in some ways. If I want to do a deep dive with one, I actually have a copy of Great Books of the Western World over on another bookshelf. So, I'm inspired by the material that I read. And it also comes into, the stuff I watch, the newsletters I subscribe to. It's all done very deliberately because I know I want to make the most out of the time that I have.
Excellent. We're starting to get a couple questions come in, Scott. So let's tackle the first one here. So the question is, which works better, audio only podcast or creating a podcast that you put the audio on a podcast and you put the video on YouTube? That's the Joe Rogan model. He's not the only one, but that idea. Do you have any counsel for our listeners on what's the right way to do that or the best way?
The answer is yes. No. Look, you're not going to be satisfied with this, but the answer is it depends on your audience. It depends on where they are and what they're willing to consume. I've done a podcast twice a month since 2007, and I do another weekly show. Both of those are audio only programs, and occasionally we will do a live video show, which is fantastic. People seem to love that. But my distribution strategy with the audio is to put it everywhere. It's on Spotify, SoundCloud, Stitcher, all the major podcast networks, and it's on YouTube. Now, why would you put an audio only show on YouTube? Because it's a search engine. It's got discoverability. And quite frankly, I don't know that anybody really needs another video of 2 old white guys sitting around talking to each other with microphones anyway. We're really not that interesting or that good looking, unless you're really into, whatever the bow tie happens to be. They're really there for the content, right? So you need to understand what you're giving to your audience, what the trade-off is. If you're going to create a video show, great, but you better have top-notch production, right? Because you are going up against the Joe Rogans. You are going up against, these major talk shows that have, 3-4 cameras that are grabbing expressions and zooming in on people and cutting over to video graphics and other things like that. Otherwise, I think audio is just fine.
Great. The second question that came in, and this is, I'm glad that somebody asked this, and it's similar to what we were talking about with energy, in that there's always something to do. If you're a thought leader or if you're a marketer, there's always something to work on. And the thing that can be, I think, for most people quite debilitating is the marketing. Marketing is exhausting. It's not very fun sometimes. So the question that came in is, how do you balance being consistent with content, which is an allocation of resources, with an effort to grow your audience on social media? In other words, I guess another way to say it is, how do you keep consistent with content, but it also expand your reach in not just an organic way?
So I'm less interested in growth than I am in resonance. I guess you could say I'm more interested in resonance than reach. Okay. Obviously, organic is fine with me. I put content out there and I expect the content to speak for itself. Now, I create content in such a way that it can be parsed out into different micro bits, whether it's a sound clip or a click to tweet kind of phrase that you'll see, to make it easy for people to find, share, and distribute my content on my behalf. But at the same time, I know I need to set aside, whatever it is, an hour or two to put the scheduled posts together, to buy the media, to, do some of the more mundane things, or to find people to do that for me, quite frankly. Where I kind of come to it with my with a director's eye and say, okay, do this, 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 and this. Here's your marching orders. Go. I've got the vision for it. They just need to execute it. Does that happen every week as a solopreneur? No, I'll be completely honest with you. Some weeks it absolutely does not. And also, here's another thing, and I think we can all relate to this. There are some weeks when I think I have created a masterpiece, right? And I've labored so hard on it, and it feels so good to put it out there, and it lands with a thud. And I'm like, it's my baby. It's, this is the thing I have delivered unto the world. And people just kind of look at it and yawn, or just don't look at it at all. And here's the thing. This is one of the reasons why I love doing something that's timeless, because I go back every single week and I cull through my old material. I look for content that's evergreen, stuff that it doesn't matter what happened in a particular week. And I will pull that out. Sometimes I'll just send it out once again. Other times I'll take it and I'll tweak it, repurpose it, and repackage it, right? I think we can all do something like that. Find that evergreen content. Find that stuff that maybe didn't work last time, but maybe it worked really well. And just because it really worked well that particular time, go ahead and hit it with some paid media and shoot it out there and see how it does again, right? But it's constant, lather, rinse, and repeat. I don't focus on my growth numbers. I focus on how people are connecting with the content that I put out there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that's a great tip. And I think I love to use the word evergreen. Journalist heads up on that one. Going back through, because we're publishing so much, I find in myself going back through, taking some time to actually look at what you've already produced. You might be surprised to know that you have some good stuff in there that can be repurposed. It still has so much value. And I think a lot of our work as marketers is keeping that awareness front of mind and not getting stuck in production mode so much that you lose those gems and keep making them findable for your audience, because that's the challenge, right? If it's not at the top of the feed, it's so easily lost, but that doesn't really speak to the quality of the content. And that thing that you labored over and that fell flat, next Tuesday might take off. Maybe it was posted at a wrong time. So I think there are so many gems that our audience can really take from that.
Yeah, and I like the idea too of focusing on the quality, focus on the art. And if you focus on the quality and the resonance, there's always something to do with the content. I think about what Kat and Jen and our team do with our content. So Emily and I co-write a blog. Jen writes also a monthly blog post. And then Emily and I have our own writing practice separate from Root and River that sometimes crosses over. And Jen and Kat do a great job of kind of cutting that up and reusing it for social media graphics. We take clips of our BIMA recordings, and those are teasers to join the community. But it all starts with quality. If it sucks, you're only going to, if it sucks and it's inconsistent, you're only going to reach people by accident or people that like stuff that sucks. And that's no way to build a brand. You need to build, that's where quality is job one, homage to your old employer. That's such a huge thing I think is overlooked. This is why, a slight editorial here, why I despise, I'll use that word, ClickFunnels. And the use of ClickFunnels, I know it's just a tool, but man, is it an abused tool. Or the oversaturation of like retweeting yourself, or behavior that I consider to be unethical, if not unethical, unprofessional.
Unseemly.
An artist, unseemly, yes. Distasteful. And because it's the work that you're doing with your brand, it's sacred. Your language is sacred. It came out of you. It's like you said, it's your baby. Why would you do it in a half-assed way, hoping that you would get some sort of result by checking a box? It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, and to your point, Justin, that the ClickFunnels, I mean, it feels good to know that we're being led from one thing to the next, but at the same time, you instinctively know this isn't personalized in any way. So to the extent you can personalize stuff, so and it's not just, you know, dear first name. I mean, that's table stakes at this point. But can you send someone a personal email? I'm not talking about email marketing. I'm talking about a personal email from your account to theirs to say, hey, I read this or I wrote this and I thought it might apply to you in, you know, such and such a way. To tag people and not tag people indiscriminately in your posts, right? To use them as examples in your work. Everyone loves to be featured in some way. It's human nature, right? And if you say, hey, I wrote this about, leadership and integrity, and I think Justin Foster is a guy who really personifies this, and I want to make sure that he sees this. And I tag you in my post. Well, that's honoring you, and that makes you more likely to want to see it. And you know, when you think about the metrics, because I know we had a question about how you actually do measure this.
Right.
It really comes down to, you know, are people opening the content? Are they spending time with it? Are they engaging? Are they writing back? You know, what kind of inbound leads are you getting? What kind of inquiries are you getting? What kind of feedback or even challenges to your outlook are you getting? Right. The more you can get people to engage and have a dialogue with you, the pass along rate, the shares elsewhere, and I would take your coding for all this with UTM codes and all the rest. There are ways to track all of this, right? You look at the way newsletters like Morning Brew have extended their brand and how they create incentives for people to pass along the email. You know, if you get 1,000 people to sign up based on your code, we'll fly you to New York to take a tour of our headquarters. Seems kind of fanciful. There are people that take that challenge up. But again, it's an exchange of value for people and giving them the chance to be the hero while using your content to do it. right? So there's all kinds of ways to explore it that are different and unusual. I remember when we first got Ford into digital customer care, right? They had been trained to get people off the phone as quickly as possible. Well, why aren't you measuring satisfaction rate at the end of that call? Delta does a wonderful job of this. If you've ever been on the phone with Delta Airlines, they say, please hold for a 1-question survey. And you're like, 1 question? I'll do 1 question all day. That's easy, right? But the question they ask you is, think about the person that just handled your call. If you owned your own business, would you hire them? Mm. That is a remarkable metric right there, right? And it really makes the customer think about Delta's commitment to them at the same time that Delta is actually extracting good information about their employees.
Yeah.
It makes it so human. I mean, that underlines the fact that they're a centric brand.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think you can see this very clearly, this bifurcation in the marketplace. Who's being human-centric? They're using ethical branding practices or being what we call humanistic marketers. And then where there's process orientation. Now, if you're a human-based brand or human-centric brand, you still need processes. But process-centric, that sort of, you see it like with the inferior quality of this year's Super Bowl ads, in my opinion. That was sort of that treadmill or like sameness factory stuff. When you decide, if you decide as a marketer and a founder to be a humanistic brand, you being a human being and admitting mistakes and saying I'm sorry and talking about people that you admire and sharing your views, political and religious views, if you feel inspired to do that, that is all fine. I think where the issue is where you go back and forth and you start to get obsessed over metrics. I always remember what Kat Weiss, our chief of staff, said to somebody, or I don't know if she said to somebody, but she said it to us when somebody asked, well, what's the ROI on brand? And Kat's response was, well, what's the ROI of not being dead inside? And there's a certain lovely truth, delicious truth to this idea that if you show up as a real person with sincerity and consistency and a love for the art and a love for people, you're going to be fine. Just keep doing it.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly right. I used to respond when people asked me at Ford about the ROI of social media in the early days. So what's the ROI of putting your pants on every day?
Right.
Right. I mean,
well, in Zoom in this last year, maybe,
right.
Yeah,
it's completely out of context now. That's an old timey quote.
Yeah, old timey. That's yeah.
Well, Scott, I think we could talk to you all day, but we have reached the top of the hour and I want to respect your time and the time of our audience. And I know I speak for Justin and I and our whole team and everybody who attended to say thank you for joining us on BIMA. And we're really, really thankful that you shared your wisdom with us. And we encourage people to go visit scottmonty.com where they can enroll in Timely and Timeless and learn more about you and connect with you. And for everyone else, we are launching our Being Marketers community. You can go to our brand new website that we just launched yesterday to learn more about our ethical community of marketers. And please be a part of it. We'd love for you to participate and you get to pick how you participate. We will have more discussions just like this one. And we invite you to join us there. Any parting words, anyone? Scott or Jen, Kat?
You all have been fantastic. I mean, from the audience questions to your own preparation, I feel like we could do this all day long. So I'll come back anytime you want.
Oh, lovely.
Thank you, Scott. And sure. I would just mark calendars. It's May 6th, I believe, is our next conversation BIMA that we're having, and with two women that are leaders in consciousness in the corporate world. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to talk about consciousness and branding, which are two of my favorite topics. That's coming up in May. So make sure, and that's only going to be available to members of the community. So make sure you sign up. But anyway, back to just thanking you, Scott. This has been a to have you on and have this kind of conversation has been a bit of like a goal that I've had for a number of years since meeting you. So it's really an honor to have you on. Kat or Jen, any closing words?
And in honor of you, Justin, I'm going to go have a BLT, accent on the bacon.
All right. Yeah, that's still one of the best branding decisions I ever made, is using that metaphor. So awesome.
All right.
Thank you all. Thank you, Kat and Jen, for the behind the scenes work. And Scott, we'll see you out there in the idea verse.
You got it.
All right. Take care.